This is the Get Sellers Calling You Marketing Podcast for real estate agents, and I'm Beatty, Carmichael. To learn how to generate more listings from past clients in sphere of influence, geographic farming, and commercial investment property, visit our website at getsellerscallingyou.com. And now let's begin our next session of Get Sellers Calling You.
Well, welcome back, everybody. My name is Penny Thomas. I'm so glad you've joined us today. I'm joined yet again by my good friend, amazing man, Beatty Carmichael. Welcome, everyone, to this next session of Get Sellers Calling You. Beatty is the CEO of Master Grabber, the creator of Agent Dominator, and one of the top marketing experts in the real estate field. Beatty, I always look forward to our calls. What do you have for our listeners today?
Well, today is a continuation from a previous call we did. And for those who are new on these calls, we do two types of calls. One is real estate marketing, and the other is Christian teaching. Kind of alternate them. And so today is another Christian teaching topic. We call it radical faith. So if you don't have interest in that, you're welcome to disengage this episode, but please come back for the next marketing episode. So today, Penny, I want to pick up on a topic we left off last time. We're talking about how to hear God speak to you. Do you remember us going through that topic?
I do. Yes, that was great.
And yeah, I had a lot of fun, and hopefully it really opened some the eyes and ears, no pun intended, of some of our listeners. But I wanted to give a quick synopsis on what we covered then, and today is part 2. So on the first part, we talked about the fact that God really does speak, okay? God speaks to us all the time. He speaks to us through His Word. He speaks to us in our heart, in our spirit, and He puts those little nudges on our heart. But you can learn to translate what He speaks to our heart into actual words and understand it in your mind, in actual words that you and I, like a thought. And we talked about the process of doing that. And the process was primarily being intentional in pursuing your relationship with the Lord. One of the greatest illustrations I've ever heard about, and the Lord gave me this illustration many years back when someone was asking, how do you so clearly hear the Lord? And at that time we had little kids, and it became a real easy illustration, but basically it's this, especially for those moms out there, this will resonate really well. Before you're a mom, if you're in a room of babies and different babies are whimpering, giggling, crying, or anything like that, you can't discern one baby's voice from another. But as soon as you have your own child, because you spend so much time with your child, loving and nurturing it, if you're in a room with babies and your baby is one of them, and your little baby starts to whimper or cry out, instantly, you know that's your child.
Yeah. And
that's the same way it is with hearing God speak to you. He always is speaking. The question is, how much do you really know the Lord? So I made a comment last time, and that's where we're going to pick up on this call, on this topic, is there are two significant things. The most significant, if you want to hear God speak to you, the most significant is that life of pursuing the Lord, studying His Word, and truly knowing Him as intimately as you know your own son, your own child, or your own spouse. But there's one more thing that is a supercharger that takes it to another level much, much faster. And that's what we call fasting. I mentioned it last time. I mentioned some stories about one time I had fasted for 6 days, and this was just a couple of years ago. And when I went before the Lord to ask questions, I was hearing Him clearer than I've ever heard, quicker than I've ever heard, and more completely than I ever heard. And I was asking Him what happened. He said, it was that 6 days of fasting. So I want to talk in terms of fasting as it relates to moving into the realm of the Spirit. Because where we hear the Lord is in the spirit realm, because that's where He speaks to us. But I want to use this topic not only to hear the Lord, but anything we do within the spirit realm. I go and I pray for healing. I fast before then. I go and I do deliverance ministry. I fast before then. And if you're doing anything where you want to engage in the authority in Christ, you're more effective in the authority in Christ when you're in the spirit realm. Is all this kind of making sense, Penny?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so in terms of fasting, I want to kind of lay the groundwork of kind of the layout of the land. So I want you to picture in your mind 3 circles that are connected with a line in between. So these could be 3 circles from left to right. The Bible tells us that we are body, soul, and spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So I want you to mentally see those 3 circles as body, soul, and spirit.
Okay.
The body is physical. The soul is who you are. So your soul is your personality, it's your memory, it's your thoughts, it's everything about you. Because who you are is not your physical, it's that spiritual entity of your soul. And so your soul is a spirit. It's not a spirit, but it operates in the spiritual realm. And then the spirit is a spiritual thing as well. So then you can take it a little bit simpler. I was asking the Lord, what's the difference between body, soul, and spirit? And he basically told me this. He said the body is a container in the physical realm for your soul, and the spirit is a container in the spiritual realm for your soul. It's not exactly correct, but it's kind of moving the right direction. It helps us kind of peg what the difference is between these 3 entities are. Is this making sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And so there's one more element that comes into play, and the Bible speaks about it a lot, and it's called the flesh. And I always was confused for a long time, thinking that the flesh was our body, and our body was our flesh, because our body is made of flesh. But that's not really what the Bible talks about when it uses the term flesh. If I were to ask you, Penny, what flesh is, how does flesh differ from the body? What would how would you describe it?
Oh gosh, I would describe it as my physical. Well,
it's hard to describe, isn't it?
I wouldn't say. I'm wanting to say it's the part of me that's apart from God.
That's a great way to put it. And you're absolutely correct. And now what I want to do, I want to put, no pun intended, I want to put some flesh around it so that we can clearly see it a little bit better, okay?
Yes.
Turn to Romans 7:14 for a quick moment.
Okay.
What we're going to see is that the flesh is spiritual. And I want to back that up with something real quick.
Okay, Romans 10, verse 17.
Romans 7:14.
Oh, sorry.
No problem.
Well, the Lord must want me to read that one then. Okay, Romans 7, verse 14 says, "For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am of the flesh, sold under sin."
Okay, so let's establish a few things real quickly. The law is spiritual. It's not physical. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So what about sin? Is sin physical or spiritual?
I think it can be both.
All right. Where does sin come from?
Sin comes from the enemy.
No. Possibly. Let me bring it back. Jesus says, in talking about you didn't wash your hands or wash the bowl, and he says, washing the outside of the cup doesn't make it clean because sin comes from where?
From your heart.
It's what's inside that comes out that makes you unclean. So sin comes from the heart. The heart is our soul of who we are, right? So sin is spiritual, it's not physical. Think about this. I have a gun in my hand and I pull the trigger. Is that sinful? No.
Mm-mm.
But if my intent was to hurt someone by pulling the trigger, then the action of pulling the trigger is the outward expression of the sin that's in my heart. The action becomes sinful, but only because it was based on my heart, which is in the spirit realm. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so we have the law is spiritual. We also know that sin is spiritual because sin is violation of the law, and you can't violate a spiritual thing in the physical. Making sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So then if the law is spiritual and sin is spiritual, and it's our flesh that causes us to sin, then the flesh has to be spiritual as well. Do you see the relationship?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what we now have is we have body, soul, and spirit. The body is physical. The soul and the spirit are spiritual. But now we have this other entity that we've got to understand. It's called the flesh. We've identified that the flesh is spiritual. It's not physical. So where does it fit within that lineup of body, soul, and spirit?
I feel like it falls between body and soul.
Ah, perfect. Absolutely. Give that woman $100.
Yay, I'll take it.
Yeah. So flesh is connected to the body. Here's how we know it as well. When someone dies, what happens to their soul? A believer.
To their soul or to their spirit?
Well, kind of both, right? But not really. This is the mystery.
I think when someone dies, the only thing that survives is the spirit. And it either survives in heaven or it survives in hell.
The soul disappears?
I believe it does.
So when you go to heaven, you no longer know who you are or any of your relatives, because all of that is their soul of who they are.
Well, no, that's okay. I see where you're going with that. So, yeah.
Okay. So
yeah.
So let's get some. So I want to cover some foundational stuff. So this sounds like this is now starting to get pretty cool, pretty exciting. Okay. So so what happens is this: your soul is who you are. Your spirit is born again. And in the very simple, and I mentioned earlier that this is a simple way to understand it, but it's not really exactly accurate, but it helps us put stuff in a framework. The body is the physical container for the soul, and the spirit is the spiritual container for the soul.
Mm-hmm.
But now we have this element called flesh that we have to deal with. Flesh is a spiritual entity that is in constant warfare with the spirit. How do we know that? Let's look at Romans 8 real quickly.
Okay.
Romans 8, verses 6, 7, and 8.
Okay. Romans 8, 6, 7, and 8 says, "For to set the mind on the flesh is death, but to set the mind on the spirit is life and peace. For the mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God, for it does not submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. Those who are in the flesh cannot please God."
All right, so this is exactly what you were saying, but in different words. The flesh is in total opposition to the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
When you set your mind on the flesh, it's sin and death. When you set your mind on the spirit, it's life and peace. So it's the flesh that causes us to sin. It's tugging on the soul to sin. But flesh is tied into the body because when we die, we sin no more.
Mm-hmm.
So what actually is going on is the body is connected to the flesh. The flesh is in a tug of war with the spirit, and that little ribbon, that little flag in the middle of a tug of war rope is your soul. The spirit's trying to tug your soul into the heavenly spiritual realm, and the flesh is trying to tug your soul back into the fleshly physical realm of sin and death. And so there's this constant tug of war back and forth between, with your soul, between the spirit and the flesh. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
Okay. Look at Galatians 5:16.
Okay. All right. Galatians 5, verse 16 says, "But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh."
Okay. So you are your soul, right?
Yes.
If you're to walk by the Spirit and not by the flesh, then it's something to do with your soul. The more your soul is walking by the Spirit, you're not gratifying the desires of flesh. But contrary to that, the more your soul is walking in the flesh, the more it violates the Spirit and displeases God. So we have this tug of war. This tug of war and understanding this is critical in understanding our walk in authority, our walk in the supernatural, hearing God speak clearly to us, because all of these things are all in the realm of the Spirit. And the realm of the flesh wants to keep us from the Spirit. Now, it's important to know that the realm of the flesh is not Satan. Satan is there, but we get to the flesh by some other means. Do you remember how we got to the flesh? What happened?
I think you'll have to remind me on that one.
Yeah, it's a hard question unless you know the point I'm looking for. Adam was fully in the Spirit, and then he did something, and now he fell into the flesh. Do you remember what he did?
He ate the fruit that Eve offered him. That's
right. He ate the fruit, and that was the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is essentially the law, this spiritual law that Paul is talking about, that now creates sin. And so the flesh has its roots, no pun intended, in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that's passed down to us through Adam. So we have this tug of war, and it's our soul that's in the middle, because it's our soul that we want to have operating in the Spirit, because that's who we are. And when we're operating in the flesh, then it's in violation of the Spirit. And so what fasting does is fasting allows us to move into the Spirit realm. Not necessarily instantly you're fully in the Spirit realm and not in the flesh, but if you take that tug of war and you've got this, so I want you to envision two people, two very big muscular guys. One side, actually I want you to picture you holding on to two guys, one on your right, one on your left. You have a rope in your hand, and those guys are pulling that rope. That's the tug of war rope. You're the flag in the middle. One of those guys is called the Spirit, and the other guys is called the flesh. And they're tugging at you, and it hurts, right? So what we want to do is we want to give more opportunity to the Spirit to tug you into the realm of the Spirit, and less opportunity for the flesh to tug you into the realm of the flesh. So that's the tug of war, and fasting is what does that. So when you think of fasting, if I were to ask you, what is fasting, what would you tell me?
I would say that it is a choice to disconnect from something that gets my attention more than God gets my attention.
Okay, good.
So for us, our family practice, fasting can be food. It can be watching TV. It could be, just all kinds of things. It's whatever is getting my attention more than God's getting my attention. food is easy because when I'm starving myself, then I know that the Lord has to sustain me. Does that make sense?
It does. I'd like to suggest a definition real quickly.
Okay.
And I'm not saying that you're wrong, because you're right, but I'd like to bring a clarification to something. I'm going to use the term biblical fasting and all other fasting. What you're describing primarily, I'm going to stay away from TV, stay away from social media. I'm going to fast desserts for a while. While that is fasting, that's not the biblical fasting that Jesus talks about when he says, this kind cannot come out by anything but prayer and fasting.
Mm-hmm.
Staying away from the newspapers of the day would not have helped Jesus cast that demon out.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Staying away from wine would not. So the biblical fasting and the fasting that was mandated in the Jewish law is a complete cessation of food. That's the biblical fasting, or at least that's what I'm calling the biblical fasting. And what it does is it cuts off the energy source to the flesh. And it's part of the process of putting your flesh to death. If you can cut off the energy source in that tug of war of the flesh and make flesh weaker, does it make sense then that the spirit can now overcome the flesh more easily and pull you more into the spirit?
Yes.
Okay. So fasting moves you into the spirit realm. It moves you in that direction. A lifestyle of fasting moves you there a lot more than just fasting once every year or two. And when you weaken the flesh, then that spirit tug of war starts to move you more and more into the spirit realm. And it's in the spirit realm that you more clearly hear God speak. Mm-hmm. It's in the spirit realm that when you issue a decree or a command in the authority of Christ, that it carries more weight. It's more effective. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have noticed, this is real interesting. So, and maybe some of our listeners out there know, I go out and I pray for people at Walmart. And a lot of times when we're praying for physical needs and for healing. And I see God heal a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I started to notice is when I would when I would prepare by fasting for a day or two before going out, the results of what I see are far more significant than if I don't fast at all. I see the same thing when doing deliverance. I see the same thing when listening to God. We mentioned this on the previous session on the same topic, that after a 6-day fast, I heard God so much more clearly. And so what fasting does is it actually moves you into the spirit realm in a way that very few things can do. And then once there, you have a lot more. So the other thing that is interesting about fasting is it's cumulative, okay? So I want to now go back to that illustration of fasting. You're tied in the middle. Your hands are tied to ropes. And on one rope is flesh, and on the other rope is spirit. So here's what fasting does. Fasting weakens the flesh, but the flesh can come strong again if you give him food. Mm-hmm. But it does one more thing. It's like taking a knife and severing that hemp rope. Have you ever had a hemp rope? You got a lot of pressure, a lot of stress on it, and you put a knife to it, and it starts to fray.
Yes.
Okay. When you stop cutting it, do the frays come back, or do they stay frayed?
They stay frayed.
They stay frayed. That's what I learned about fasting. Fasting is like cutting that hemp rope that's between you and flesh. And it's cumulative. So you can cut a little bit now, a little bit in a month, a little bit in a month, and after several years, that hemp rope is really, really frayed. Or you could fast a whole lot right now and fray it a lot. It's cumulative. So it's almost as if, I don't want to say that it's that you can get the same impact by fasting one day, 40 days over a period of 5 years versus fasting 40 days in a row. There's something significant about an extended fast consecutively. But generally speaking, what I've learned is that fasting is cumulative. The longer you fast, the more you fast, the greater the impact, and the more you begin to move into the Spirit and operate in the Spirit and stay within the Spirit. Is this making sense?
It is, absolutely.
So you want to do that and stay focused on it. The other thing is, how do you fast? So technically, fasting, biblical fasting, is no food, okay? It starts with severing the energy source to your body because your flesh is tied to the body. If your flesh is weak, then if your body is weak, if it has no energy, then it can't give any energy to the flesh, and your flesh starts to die. So you can almost see what's happening in your flesh by what's happening in your body. When your body is weak because you don't have food, well, your flesh is getting weak because it doesn't have food. Okay?
Yeah.
And because of that, when you fast, you want to focus on water only. Now, I mentioned in the last session on this that when I first started fasting as part of my day of prayer, I skipped breakfast, and by lunchtime I was famished. Sometimes I would start get the jitters. Have you ever had the jitters because you haven't eaten recently?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So I start to get the jitters, and I found that I could take a Starburst or a little glass of juice or something, and it would overcome that.
Mm-hmm.
And for me to fast for 24 hours was almost impossible. Most of my fasting was like 18 hours because I didn't eat after dinner Thursday night. I would do my day of prayer on Friday, and then I would probably eat like at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock that afternoon. Mm-hmm. So it was only like maybe 18 hours, and it was really difficult. But the more you do it, the more accustomed you get to it. And now, for me to fast for a couple of days, 3 days, 4 days if I need to, it's not a big deal. It's not comfortable, but I don't go through those jitters. So those jitters are only temporary. And once you start doing it enough times, you start to say, okay, you can make it through. But what fasting is not, this is what happens with a lot of people. They say, I'm going to fast and just drink juice. Or I'm going to fast and I want to make protein shakes. Well, that doesn't do any good because really all you're doing is you're converting your calories, which is the energy for your body. You're converting it from solid food to liquid food. But you're still consuming calories, so you're still feeding the flesh. So that really isn't the fasting that causes you to move into the Spirit. It's not the fasting that helps you hear God better. It's not the fasting that Jesus said, this type of demon doesn't come out with anything but prayer and fasting. The fasting is a complete cessation of calories and only drinking water to sustain your bodily functions. Is that making sense?
It does, absolutely.
Does that sound exciting to do?
No. No.
It's not.
My husband and I have done many water-only fasts, and it's hard, but you're absolutely right. The more, just like our last talk that we had about hearing from God, the more you practice reading the Word and spending time with Him, the more you hear His voice, the easier it gets. And fasting is sort of the same. When you first start, it's really hard, but the more you do it, the easier it becomes.
Yes. So I want to give you some practical suggestions on fasting now. So number one, it's water only. If you're serious about fasting, serious about moving into the spirit realm and away from the flesh, the mindset on the spirit is life and peace. The mindset on the flesh is sin and death. If you're serious about really hearing God, see, fasting in the Bible, if you go back to fasting in the Bible, Moses fasted when God gave him the Ten Commandments. He fasted again when he sought the Lord to intercede on Israel's behalf so that God would not destroy Israel when they made the golden calf. You see fasting by Elijah when Jezebel threatens Elijah's life. And so Elijah runs to the mountain of God, and he's 40 days and 40 nights without food. We see fasting as part of the law. We see fasting with King David when he fasted when his first son with Bathsheba was born, and God said, because you were wicked with that, I'm going to take your son. David fasted for 7 days roughly in hopes that the Lord would avert taking his son. Mm-hmm. We see Jesus fasting, and we see fasting as a consistent thing throughout Scripture. In fact, what's really interesting is Jesus even says, when you fast, okay? Not, and this is Matthew 6:16, he says, when you fast, do not wear down, and then go through the signs of fasting that the Jews would do to bring attention to themselves. And what's interesting is Jesus doesn't say if you fast as if it's optional. He says when you fast. This is actually something that you're supposed to do. Jesus models fasting all the time. So when you fast, some of the things to keep in mind is it's a full fast. When you first get started, it's difficult. The first day is always the hardest. And even now, sometimes if I'm going to be on an extended fast and I get really weak, I'll take just a half a glass of juice to tide me over. One time. This isn't a half a glass every hour. Okay, so in a day you've now had 20 glasses of juice. It's just enough to tide you over if those little jitters are too much for you. It's not enough to really feed the flesh, but it's enough to keep you going in fasting. What you'll find is the first day is horrible. The second day, usually about the halfway of the second day, is about the worst it'll ever get. And then from then on, it starts to get better. By day 3, how long, what's the longest that you fasted, Penny? Water only?
Brian and I have done, we've done a 21-day fast, but
wow.
But let me clarify that. The first 10 to 14 days were the Daniel fast, just water and vegetables.
Okay, so you had calories.
Yes, and then the last half of the fast, so the last 10 to 12 days was just water only.
Okay, all right. So, So the longest I've done is 21 days, water only, and it is grueling. But here's what I found, and I don't know if you found this because your fast, your quote, what I'm calling biblical fast, didn't really start until 10 days into it. But what I found, and I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying that there's calories along the way.
Yeah, sure.
What I found is usually by about day 3, you start to have lots of energy. Your mind becomes really clear. I remember on days 6, 7, 8, I was out there, I was ready to go play tennis and run and exercise, all with water only. So the worst part is just those first couple of days, and then it gets a lot better. So that's encouragement for those who are going to say, I'm going to move into a fast. Don't forget, it's not a sin if you have to break the fast.
That's right. Okay?
It's not a sin. You can, get through the grunge work and do it again.
That's right.
How long should you fast? Well, it's all up to you. Okay. I almost want to say this. I say this jokingly. Well, it depends on how spiritual you want to be, how much in the spirit you really want to get into. If you really hunger to really hear God clearly, then fast longer than shorter. When you have a really important decision to make, don't do a 12-hour fast and expect that to be enough. Okay? If you really need to make a decision, you got to hear God clearly. Be willing to go a little bit deeper into a longer fast. But the longer you fast, the more you move into the Spirit, and the more those things of the Spirit become more available to you. And then as you do a lifestyle of fasting, like for me, I fast at least once a month because of my day of prayer. But when I do street ministry, go out and pray for people, which right now it seems to be about twice a month, then I start fasting on Thursday night after dinner, and I don't eat until sometime Saturday afternoon. Because street ministry, when I go out, I do it on Saturdays. So, now you're looking at 5 days at least of fasting every month. And so you start to accumulate a lot of great opportunity to be moving in the Spirit and putting the flesh to death. And that's an easy pace. You're not knocking yourself out, but because it's cumulative, it's real effective. And the last couple of things is, how fast does it work? I want to caution you that you can't just fast a day and all of a sudden you hear God clearly tomorrow, as I've said. It's a lifestyle. Everyone is different, and the Lord does different things. With my son, as soon as he fasts a day or two, he's in the heavenly realm, essentially. I've never been to heaven. He's there all the time. The Lord has a special calling on his life, okay? And so as soon as he starts fasting, he feels himself, sort of moving into the Spirit really, really fast. When I was doing my 21-day fast after 7 days, he says, "Have you gone to heaven yet?" I said, "No, and don't ask me about it." I was a little upset. I wanted to see what heaven was like. So it's different with everyone. And but the main thing is, it should be a lifestyle, and it's not a magic pill.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I want to talk about with fasting. In the topic and in the format of how do you hear God speak to you? Once you have a lifestyle of pursuing the Lord and pursuing that relationship with Him, the next thing that really takes your hearing God speak to you to a completely new level is entirely based on fasting. And once you do that, then all kinds of other things. Here's something that's really interesting. I don't know if you noticed this, Penny. When I read the Word, and I've been studying the Word, and I've been fasting, it's like God illuminates so much more. He speaks to me in my heart in terms of what a passage means. It just comes to life.
It's revelation.
It's that revelation, exactly.
Yeah, He's giving you revelation of a scripture that you might have read 100 times, but when you're
in the Spirit,
denying the flesh by fasting, then all of a sudden your spirit comes alive, and you're actually hearing directly from the Lord as you were intended to all along. Yeah, it's awesome.
Do you have anything to add before we wrap up?
I don't, other than this is great, and I hope everyone is encouraged to give it a try.
Yes, and make it a lifestyle.
Yes. Well, Beatty, thank you so much. Again, this was an amazing sort of part 2 to our talk about hearing, being able to hear God, and what is it like to hear God. And we always just appreciate the time and effort you put into studying and imparting to our listeners and to myself all the things that you've learned. And we just really appreciate it.
Well, you're very welcome. I love doing it. And for those listeners out there, if you have not subscribed, please let me encourage you to subscribe so you'll get this every time we do another message. And please, if you have folks who you think could benefit from this, please share this podcast with them. Y'all have a very blessed day, and thanks for allowing us to share this.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe to it so you never miss another episode. Also, if you want an easy way to grow your business, check out Agent Dominator. We guarantee listings and sales from past clients in sphere of influence, geographic farming, and commercial investment properties. If you don't get the sales we promise, we'll give your money back. Learn more on our website at getsellerscallingyou.com and select Agent Dominator from the menu. Thanks for listening to the Get Sellers Calling You podcast, and have a great day.